Brilliant. Thank you so much. Just in case if there's any problem, let me know, and maybe I can check. So far, I think everything's good. All right, then let's get started. Lot of work to do. I mean, we need not get too too worried about the volume of work, but sure, a lot of interesting work to do, and kind of the pre-scene, especially the pre-scene, was very interesting personally to me because my father used to work at the Hamad International Airport in Doha way back when. So I grew up hearing stories from the airport, because he was a technician there, and hearing a lot of stories about runways and terminals and the kind of work he did, and all that. So I've been associated to a couple of projects in Doha back in the day as well. So I remember those days as well. So when I read the pre-scene, it was all very reminiscent of all the stories I heard. So for me personally, it was a very interesting case. Um, so I hope all of you've read and you have a sort of good first impression about the pre-scene. All right. This is the pre-scene. You've got it. Just before I start, I want to take your attention to the COVID-19 statement. And Ernest, you're back in the session. I hope you can clearly hear. If there's any issue, just let me know. All right. So COVID-19 statement, this pre-scene and the case study in general, while aiming to reflect real life, are set in a context where the COVID-19 pandemic not had an impact, has not had an impact. This is the assumption that we work with. Even the previous case studies, last time, the one before that, during the COVID-19 pandemic, this assumption was there. But SEMA didn't really include it like this very explicitly in the pre-scene. They talked about it to tutors. They mentioned it here and there in a couple of tutor meetings, but it wasn't very clearly communicated. But I'm very happy to see this. So you can, be very relaxed and calm about whether COVID-19 is going to affect. It's always a kind of bother, and sometimes learners and members who are taking the exam worry about it. So you don't have to worry about it. The moment you bring COVID into the situation, a lot of things are going to get disrupted, supply chain especially. So that is not a problem anymore. So this entire pre-scene is 37 pages, out of which the first part I've extracted for you is 13 pages. I've extracted 13 pages from this pre-scene. These 13 pages belong or discuss about the industry, about the company. Sorry, not the company, the industry and the business model, the airport operations business model. And just to reiterate here, in the first page of the pre-scene, page number 1, Airfield is a quoted company that owns and operates 6 major airports, 4 in the home country and 2 overseas. So that's the business. The question that we are asking ourselves today is, what does it mean to own and operate an airport? That's the question. And what do you do? How does it work? What are the different segments? What are the things you have to take care of? How does an airport actually function? That's the question that we are trying to answer today. Is without that understanding, trying to talk about the business, trying to talk about trying to discuss various variants or cases, this is going to be moot and invalid. So we have to have a very thorough understanding of what airport operations generally involve. So let's do that. So I'm not going to really use the 13-page extract. I'm not going to read the whole thing because one, I hope all of you received my mail in the afternoon today. For me, some of you, it must be early. So I kind of requested you to read this, and I hope that all of you got a chance to read the document. And what I'm going to do is first, let's quickly run through very quickly to understand what the 13 pages talk about. What are the different sections? We know that the 13 pages answer the fundamental question: what does airport operations management involve? And that's what these 13 pages are about. So let's take a look at the different sections. In the first page here, this table talks about some of the um, components of the sites, right? You know that airport operations, like airports, are set up in very large sites, very huge landscapes. What are the different labels that we use to name the different users of that land? So here we get an explanation on runways, taxiways and aprons, passenger terminals, freight terminals, hangars and maintenance facilities, etc. This table gives us a brief idea, a brief description about all of these. And I was thinking when I was reading the pre-scene, doing the research, that these words are words that we have to get very familiar with, because in the writing aspect, in the vocal aspect, when we talk about airport operations, we will have to very regularly use these terms. So runways, taxiways. One idea that you need to put into your mind is, let's be familiar with the language related to airport operations. Then they say that there are two main categories of commercial airports. One is a hub airport, and the other type is a non-hub or a spoke airport. Now, even if you have any kind of familiarity with the courier industry, right? Even couriers operate with these two terms. There are hubs and spokes in the distribution approach that they take. Same thing, I was very interested, like it was very interesting to see that they use the same language, even airports. And the pre-scene gives us an idea about what kind of airports these two are, what the definitions are, so that we understand them, and to see, do we own hub airports or do we own spoke airports? What is the difference? That is answered in this section. Then there is a map that has been provided of just to illustrate how hubs and spokes differ from each other, and they illustrate it through an example as well, which is embedded within the story here. For example, here, so we will touch on this image as well and see. Okay, we will try to understand what spokes and hubs actually are. The next section is dedicated to flight operations. So it is a fairly brief discussion here on flight operations, where they touch on a couple of things about runways. Mostly, if you read these paragraphs, or I'm assuming you have already read them, you will notice that they describe the connection of facilitating a flight to take off and land, and the management of runways, and how important those qualities of runways are. So we will learn about that as well. So here's a few nice images. We've got a flight taking off. We have an image of a bridge connecting to a flight, and the type of movement. Yes, this is the movable bridge that can be taken when the flight is not connected to the terminal. So these are just different options that are discussed within the flight operations segment as well. The images portray a nice view on the kind of things that we generally experience when we travel. So that's a pleasant thing as well. Here there's a section, a large section. You would have noticed that passenger facilities take up almost a full page. So this entire page is dedicated to talking about a passenger's journey. What does a passenger go through when a passenger enters an airport? What are the different facilities that are made available to make a passenger's life easy? As an airport, what does an airport provide? That entire discussion here tries to give a view on passenger facilities. Then you have boarding passes and identification, which is a very important tool that passengers carry with them. So what are boarding passes? Why are they used? Who uses them? What kind of additional purposes does it serve, etc. are discussed here. Then there is a section on transport infrastructure. So this section basically talks about the movement of passengers, baggage, cargo, freight, etc. Right? Because there's a lot of things that are moving around, right? Even staff movement within the airport is very critical, very important. There's land side, air side, security concerns. Nobody should have access to all the places. Air traffic control is separate, etc., etc. So because of this, movement has to be managed very carefully within the airport. This section, the transport infra section, talks about the kind of movements and how it's facilitated. There are a lot of raw material, right, like fuel and other consumables, right, food that needs to get uh, transported properly, and that is actually supported by this discussion on logistics, where internally how are airports equipped to refuel and resupply aircrafts, etc. So, in fact, when I was just overall reading the whole thing, for me, the transport infrastructure and the logistics segments, both of these sections sort of pitch the same story as to how movement within an airport is facilitated. So, uh, one way to think about it, especially from a passenger's perspective, and maybe even baggage, is for you to reimagine yourself going through one of your journeys that you had taken. What happened? Where did I enter? Where did I arrive at? Then what did I have to do after check-in? Then all right, sure. What next? What next until boarding? What did I do? Just and then when you land, after that, how did you get to the terminal? From the terminal, how did you get to the baggage counter? How did you check out your baggage? How did you leave customs, etc., etc.? So when you think about that entire journey, you kind of, at least from a passenger's perspective, get an idea, get a view on how this whole thing happens. So that was also very interesting. Then there is a revenue segmental breakdown. In general, the pre-scene generalizes and gives us a view. And to see, as you can see in the image, airports don't make money from a very straightforward approach. There are three main categories: aeronautical, non-aeronautical, and non-operating. Right? In these proportions, in general. In fact, they say that aeronautical, which is basically a combination of fees that airlines pay to the airports, is not sufficient, not enough to make them profitable. Therefore, there are other ways of making money, most of which is non-aeronautical. So we do touch on that, and they give us a full breakdown of but they give us a definition and an additional breakdown of what these actually mean. So we understand that and we look at that. So as a senior finance manager, or rather maybe CFO of a airport owner and operator, this will be very important to understand how can we make money, how can we make more money, how can we manage the money in a very effective, very sound manner. And then there is a section on landing slots. So the term slots are very, very important. It's another word that is very frequently used in the airport operations industry. We have to have a very good understanding of what slots are, what do slots mean, who owns them, uh, why exactly are slots needed, do they trade, etc., etc. So the moment you understand what a slot means, everything makes sense. So this entire section is dedicated to explaining what a slot is, and how slots are, kind of they go through various transactions. There is a certain behavior to it. We understand that. And finally, this section on air traffic control. So in any airport, you would have seen that sort of like a very tall tower right on top. They have air traffic control, which has a full view of the airport and the runways and the taxiways and all the entire land site. So what air traffic control is, why are they important, who manages them, is it the airport that controls the air traffic? Because air traffic is basically the traffic in the space right above the airport. There is a designated space. So how is that traffic managed? Who manages it? Why is it very important? So all these things are discussed in this section. So as far as the initial reading is concerned, I hope that you've done your reading at least once, so you know what to look forward to in this segment. So as I mentioned, this is just an overview. of this, and I'm not going to use this because the reading is basically up to you. What we are going to do is we are going to learn from this. So there is a segment. There is what I do is I prepare supplementary content which helps us analyze these different parts. So you will have 4 supplementary pieces of pre-scene analysis, and this is the first one that you're seeing here. This will be, I haven't added it to the folder because I kind of wanted to surprise you. But if you have watched my YouTube content, you know that there is going to be something like this. But sure, and this is the first part, the pre-scene analysis part 1. The document where we are going to learn about the industry and the business model. We will be using this, and now we are going to go through this entire document. This is not 13 pages, it's 9 pages, and it's more compact and it's more organized. Because there's a lot of repetition in the pre-scene. The way it's written is very paragraph form, but I've always found that learners find it very easy when it's better organized. And firstly, let's try and understand what airport operations mean. Let's understand airports. All right. So in that essence, let me give you a quick reminder and also congratulate you on your appointment as senior finance manager for one of the world's, or one of at least Nolan's largest airport operations company, Arfield. So truly, congratulations. I know you're not getting paid, but it's a big deal. You report to the board and you advise on special projects and strategic matters. So very, very serious stuff, very, very important matters. A quick snap of our company. We own and operate 6 major airports, 4 in Nolan and 2 overseas. The company is listed. It's listed in the Nolan Stock Exchange, and there's a beta of 1.15. So we kind of are in a space which is slightly above market risk, which is not a bad thing, right? Higher the risk, higher the return. So maybe the rewards are also very high. Nolan's largest airport management company in terms of revenue and the number of flights moved. So this is our company, and we know where we are. Let's try to understand airports. Airports provide the necessary facilities to enable commercial air travel for passengers and freight. Airports are established on large sites. So just to give you a view, give you a snapshot of an airport. This is the Vancouver International Airport, an aerial view of the runways and the entire airport. You're basically seeing all the things that you mentioned, or that the pre-scene mentioned: runways, taxiways, aprons, terminals, landside, airside, inside those, sure, entryways, everything is here in this image. As you can see, it's massive. And if I ask you, how many runways do you see in this image?
3.
3, correct. Right. So you see one here, another here, and there's another here. So it's if there's an airport with 3 runways, it's massive. It's a really big deal to have that many runways. This image is of the Heathrow International Airport. Again, very big. One of the busiest airports in the world. I've actually had the good fortune to be there a couple of times, and the view is amazing, especially if you're landing at night. It's like really cool. You get a full view of London, and the airport is massive and it's so busy. Like, it's really, really extremely busy. So that is an image of Heathrow. And there's some very interesting news these days. Heathrow Airport is in the news for a couple of interesting reasons that will be important for us as well. So we will touch on that as we go along. All right, so let's try and understand what these different labels are. Runways. Planes require stable runways that are long enough for planes to accelerate to flying speed when taking off and to decelerate to a safe stop when landing. These are usually paved with concrete for strength and stability. So these are very long uh, roads that are built for flights to take off and land. Runways are normally oriented so that the prevailing wind blows along them. This is to increase the airflow over aircraft wings. You know that aircrafts use the Bernoulli theorem and kind of the airflow, the flow of air for it to take off and even in landing. So the runways are built geographically to match the airflow to make it easier for aircrafts to take off and land. Runways have to cater to aircraft sizes. Larger flights normally require longer runways, kind of obvious. And airports can have multiple runways which may be parallel to one another. So Heathrow, I think, is a good example where all the runways that you see here are parallel to each other. So aircrafts can use both without crossing each other's flight paths. But they don't usually, I mean, you very rarely you see runways just tagged next to each other. Even if it is, there will be a massive space between them because of these air current matters. So aircrafts can use both without crossing each other's flight paths and may also be offset at angles for air traffic controllers to vary flight paths for weather and noise considerations. So there's a lot of things that you need to consider when you are designing an airport, especially when you are thinking about how to set up the runways, because there are so many factors in terms of taking off, landing, safety, traffic, congestion, terminal connections, etc., etc. The runway has to be built in a way that makes it easier and not difficult. So these are the characteristics and the idea of what runways are, and they are one of the most crucial elements as far as airport landscape is concerned. Taxiways are effectively roadways that are wide enough to permit aircraft to taxi safely. And aprons are areas of flat ground that allow for freedom of movement and for aircraft parking. So if you take this image, so here in this image, this space, these are what you are generally referring to as aprons, and here these are taxiways that help aircrafts move and turn and connect to terminals, etc. So it's the way we can think about it is runways is one end, aprons are the other end, which connect to terminals. Taxiways connect runways with aprons. That's the way we can understand that. So I hope we have a clear understanding of what these three terms are. Next, let's talk about a very important space in airports, passenger terminals. These are areas that provide all the facilities required to process departing passengers and their baggage, and also include the facilities required by arriving passengers and passengers in transit. So there are here they mention three types of passengers: arriving, departing, and transit passengers. The terminals are places where these passengers stay and get all their work done. All the facilities that airport operations provide is provided in these terminals. Terminal buildings will reflect the types of aircraft and the number of passengers that can be processed. Terminals have gates used by arriving and departing passengers to enter and leave. So anyone who's like, since all of you have flown, you know that the announcements happens in terms of the gates, right? Gate number 1, gate number 2, gate number 3. So these gates are basically those connectors that allow passengers to move out of or enter into a terminal. These gates are equipped with bridges that connects the terminal building to the aircraft doors for passengers to enter or leave the aircraft. An alternative to these bridges is to tow mobile stairs. That image we saw earlier in the pre-scene, the correct term, I kind of had forgotten it, a mobile staircase. is to tow mobile stairs to the aircraft where passengers may be able to walk to or from the terminal if the aircraft is parked nearby. Terminals are designed to encourage the safe, secure, and efficient flow of passengers. So interior designing of terminals are varied. I've seen some beautiful airports. Airports are very, very, very good looking, very beautiful, very large, massive. Some airports, even like if you're a frequent flyer and you fly around a lot, you might have airports that you like. I've spoken to people who praise certain airports and who dislike certain other airports because of the terminal. Right? It depends on the terminal and also the accessibility, how easy it is to access the airport. That is also definitely one factor. I've yeah, so almost like a lot of airports are beautiful. I don't have any complaints to about the few airports I've been. These are massive, and one thing I hate about airports is they make you spend, don't they? Especially if you have to wait for a couple of hours, then you get to spend. You feel like spending. They're designed in a way that in the air side, the duty free and the catering and the dining and the lounge and everything is there in a way that every time you move through, you kind of spend more than you were planning to, at least by means of getting a few extra chocolates and extra sweets for all the kids waiting at home. So yeah, that happens. So terminals are very, very customer friendly, passenger friendly spaces. Freight terminals are areas that provide facilities required to handle the air freight. So we will talk about what freight is, but freight is basically the space of moving cargo, not passengers, but cargo. So there are freight terminals, there can be freight terminals separately that are dedicated to manage cargo. These are what we refer to as freight terminals. Then you have hangars. Hangars are buildings that are large enough to accommodate an aircraft for engineers to work on. Airlines often rent hangars for their own exclusive use as well. Sometimes areas of aprons are also set aside for minor and quick repairs. So, like hangars is a general term, right? You even see that used in a lot of mechanical work where a hangar is basically a space where you operate a machine. It's separately dedicated to operating the machine. Even in railway stations, you see hangars, massive ones. Massive railway stations, you see separate spaces dedicated to repairing engines. So the same thing with airports. I remember a scene. I don't know if there are those of you who watch movies here, but if you do, recently there was a movie called Tenet, and in that movie there's a explosion of an aircraft. An aircraft is blown, and that happens in a hangar, a place where the aircraft is there, just just there's some repairs going on. It is not a terminal, it is a hangar. It's a separate place where aircrafts are aircrafts go through their own repairs, maintenance, refueling, etc. But as they say here, sometimes for quick minor changes, minor updates, minor repairs, aprons can also be used. You don't really have to park the aircraft into a hangar. All right, so that's a snap of all the key terms. So runways, taxiways, aprons, passenger terminals, freight terminals, and hangars. Please remember these terms. I hope you have an understanding. They're not very complicated. I hope you have an understanding now, so you will never need to, revisit this. Now you understand. All right. So this is what, this is how you demarcate the land space of an airport. Next, let's talk about the categories of airports and their significance to travel. So the pre-scene talks about two categories: hub airports and non-hub or spoke airports. Let's try and understand these. Hub airports are main bases for one or more airlines. These are main. These make it easier to offer connecting flights. Hubs are mainly designed to offer cheaper and efficient long-haul routes. So basically, a hub airport is a major airport. It's an airport which handles a lot of long haul routes, and it's not that they don't offer short haul. Generally offer a mix of both short haul and long haul flights, but mainly they offer a lot of connections. A lot of connecting flights are offered through major hubs. These airports are massive. They are very well recognized. They are located in very strategic locations continentally, and they connect a lot of routes. These are hub airports. Spoke airports are more regional. These are generally offer short-haul flights to and from hub airports, and also serve airlines that offer direct flights to short-haul destinations. Short-haul flights are generally up to roughly 2,000 kilometers. So within the distance of around 2,000 kilometers, especially intracontinental, within the continent, within the country itself, all the mini airports you might have are all spoke airports. So this image gives us a view of this, how hubs and spokes work. The red markings are for hub airports and the yellow ones are for spoke airports. Here they talk about, or they give us an image of three countries: Farland, Norland, and Sealand. In Norland, they mentioned there's a hub, Capital City International, and two spokes, Eastern Regional and Southern Regional. In Farland, you have Farland International, which is a hub. Farland Greentown, Farland Browntown, and Farland Seatown are spokes. And Sealand, which is probably a small country and something a little away from main flight routes. So therefore, they have a spoke airport. But let's try to figure this out even clearer. Why exactly do we need to demarcate this? Let's consider an example. This is the example that is given in the pre-scene itself. Consider traveling from Crossline to Farland Greentown. All right. So consider traveling from, so we need to travel from Crossline. Actually, we need to travel from here to here. So there is, based on the routes that are visible here, you don't have a direct flight. There is no way to directly get from Crossline to Farland, and Crossline and Greentown are both spoke airports. So what we have to do is we have to go from Crossline to CCI, Capital City International. Then from Capital City International, we need to take a flight to Farland International. And from Farland International, we need to take another flight to Farland Greentown. So this is A, this is B, and this is C. So this is what hubs and spokes offer. Because you can basically use Norflight, which is the airline in Norland. You can use that to go from Crossline to Farland International. So you fly Norflight here for A and B. And then from Farland International to Farland Greentown, you take Air Farland. So one of the key traits, as I mentioned, hubs connect flights, is visible here, where you cannot really directly get from a spoke to another spoke. You need to go through a connection, and that connection is offered from these major hubs that are available. And obviously, airlines have a big say here. Airlines, like it's the number of airlines, right? If you have a lot of airlines operating through a particular airport, then automatically that airport becomes important. I mean, obviously, an airline would definitely prefer destinations where a lot of passengers travel to. That's why hubs become important automatically, because airlines prefer them, passengers prefer them, and it's easier logistically and for transport in either ways. Even in terms of freight, it would be very easy. And hubs are, of course, designed for courier, for other cargo handling. All of these are facilitated in large spaces. There are different facilities, specialist arrangements made in these airports. When you actually do a little bit of research, you will notice that sometimes airport operators talk about expansion. So most of the expansion they do for hubs. And what do? They're basically expanding to cater the extra volume. That is what is happening. Of course, COVID-19 has had a sort of negative impact, but I think the industry is bracing for a better comeback very soon. I just saw yesterday or day before yesterday, Qatar Airways had flown a flight around the Qatar airspace. They called it the vaccinated flight, where all the members of the flight were vaccinated, and the idea was to promote air travel. They did it as sort of like a um, marketing operation, a marketing activity to tell customers, to tell passengers, potential passengers, that their flights are safe and they take only vaccinated passengers. So if you're vaccinated, you're free to travel. Get vaccinated, don't fear air travel. That was the kind of message they wanted to give. All right. So that's an idea about hubs and hubs and spokes. Now there is this interesting question. Now in that story I mentioned, right, where you want to get from Crossline to Farland International to Farland Greentown, there are now you're flying no fly here, and you're flying Air Farland here. Now the question is this: if you're the passenger, do you need to book from two websites? Do you need to talk to two travel agents? If you're doing self booking, right? Do you need to do it in at least because you're flying two airlines? Do you need to visit the airlines, both the airlines websites, and book the flight separately? No, you don't. That is where the concept of code share agreement coming. There is this concept. In fact, it's facilitated by the international IATA as well. That's why if you're opening up any kind of travel, like booking system, you need to get registered to this main system because of code share agreements. These enable passengers to book all of the flights required for a particular journey through a single airline's website. So here, despite us having to take two airlines, right, two flights or multiple flights from two airlines, different airlines, you don't need to do multiple transactions. Only a single transaction can get this deal done. A single transaction. All the three flights will be booked. That is facilitated through code share agreements. Here, even though one or more flights making up that journey will be provided by a different airline, these give passengers a much wider range of potential destinations. So if No-Fly and Air Farland has a code share agreement, a passenger can book the A plus B plus C route, this entire route from Crossline to Farland Greentown, in a single transaction from either airline's website. So it's basically a code embedded within in the backend of your website, like sort of like an API. And these agreements facilitate single transaction models, even when there are multiple airlines, multiple flights involved in your journey. Exactly, like Star Alliance, among many others, I believe. So that's why when you want to book a flight with connecting arrangements, through transits, you can just make a single transaction and you get all these different options. They give you, all right, you can take this flight A to flight B or flight A, B, C, or there's a direct flight, but it's very costly, etc., etc. And depending on your preferences, flight time, if you get too tired and too anxious when you're on for longer durations, you don't really want to be packed in a aircraft for 14 hours. There are very lengthy flight destinations. I think one of the longest is from the US to no, I think this I'm not sure exactly. I've taken a very long flight. This is it was about 12 hours, right? And so it's its own experience. But there are passengers who don't like that, who rather prefer taking a break here and there, etc. So depending on your preferences and facilitated by code share agreements, you can basically travel based on a way that you prefer. All right, so that's a view on the different types of airports and how airports facilitate, how airports enable passengers to minimize the number of transactions involved and travel very smoothly in a very relaxed manner through code share agreements that are shared among airlines. So I hope that is very clear. Next, we touch on air traffic control. So air traffic control, here you see in this image, right? This is basically an image from within an air traffic control room. I have a couple of, interestingly, I have a couple of my previous students who are working in air traffic control here in the Bandaranaike International Airport here in Colombo. So this is the view, and you've got all these monitors that basically provide you and feed you information. Now, air traffic control doesn't belong to the airport. So as our field, our company, we don't own air traffic control. Air traffic control is the government's business, but we need to facilitate them, and they are definitely an important and a must-have function as far as an airport is concerned, or else you can't really operate. So what do they do? Air traffic control is used to manage flight movement in airspace. Manages flight movement in airspace. How? With the use of radars, computers, and human operators, and ensures that aircraft flight paths do not create collision risks. That is very, very important. So we haven't really heard stories, right? We haven't really heard stories of, like, for example, personally, I can tell you that I don't know, again, if any of you here are TV show, you watch TV shows, television shows, but I have watched my fair share of TV shows, and there is one of the world's most popular shows called Breaking Bad. And in this show, there was an incident. That is where I learned about the gravity of air traffic controls, where an air traffic controller's daughter dies, and this then he comes back to work. It's a very stressful job, this one, especially if you're working in a very congestion prone, traffic based airspace. And this person is so upset because the daughter had died, and he basically, out of anger and out of all the negative feelings, drives two flights to crash against each other. And for an instance, I remember watching that episode, and I was thinking, okay, where is this person? Why is this person? Why are they showing us an airport? And then only you realize, my goodness, this person is that is going to just crash two flights, and it crashes, and so many people died in the story. So that's where I learned how important the air traffic control is. And when you really read this, you realize we know road traffic, but air traffic is its own very unique and very high pressure space, because it's really unlike road traffic, especially in busy airspaces with a lot of things going on, and you're not operating in a single altitude, right? You're not operating in a single, like, if it's the road, it's just that. But when it comes to air, you've got multiple altitudes, and if you really have a traffic situation, you would have, if you have ever been in such a situation where they just keep the flight rotating in that airspace around the airport, so the whole time for 3 hours you're just the flight is there, it's not landing, it's not going anywhere, and you're just waiting. You just want the flight to just land and let you go. So all of that is being managed by them. Air traffic control is managed by national governments. The Noland Air Traffic Control Service is responsible for managing the airspace, very important, over the whole of Noland and in the skies up to 100 kilometers from Noland's coast. So that is the condition, or that is the situation at Noland. Air traffic control is responsible for all in-flight safety matters. Airports have limited or no control over the air traffic. So airports have limited or no control over air traffic, and absolutely cannot direct aircraft that are airborne, and cannot instruct an aircraft to take off or land without the clearance from air traffic control, without the permission, without the clearance. Rather, they have a direct line to pilots as well, air traffic controllers. So without their permission, nothing is going to happen as far as takeoff, landing, or airspace management is concerned. Airports receive constant updates from air traffic control in order to manage the operations on the ground. So the airports receive constant updates. They know what is going on, because without knowing what time is the flight going to land, what time is the flight going to depart, without knowing all that, the ground operations cannot be scheduled. Airports can receive air traffic control data, but cannot transmit data to air traffic control. So air traffic control is basically a data generator spot. They don't receive external data, but they share their data. Pilots are regularly in touch with air traffic control to update them about the status of their aircraft. So that's why I earlier mentioned, without that, obviously pilots have to have. So when they are in the vicinity, they can directly communicate and talk to the aircraft air traffic control room and communicate. And even in terms of emergencies, they can communicate their needs, and the air traffic control team will facilitate all these requirements to ensure that passengers and crew members and the people who are in the airport, in the land, are all very, very safe. That's the fundamental requirement here. So now I hope you have a decent understanding of what air traffic control is. I mean, you can just plug into YouTube, just type air traffic control, maybe type interesting video about air traffic control or whatever, and you can watch a video. But there is the idea is, sometimes there are actually videos where air traffic control views, like flights moving like small dots moving around and how it is managed. I came across a video where two professors and I think an air traffic controller explains about 1.5 hours how they manage on a certain day the airspace. So it's I felt like it was very, very stressful to do that. I think it's also among the highest paid jobs. I'm not sure if it's like at the top 10 or top 20 or whatever, but in the tactical level, air traffic control is one of the highest paid jobs generally in the world. So right, so that brings me to another very important segment, operating capacity, right? What makes an airport attractive? One of the main reasons. Why do we talk about Los Angeles, LAX, or Heathrow, or Dubai, or Hamad, right, or Oman, right, the Oman airport. So like there are, I think, Bangalore, right? We talk about certain airports because they're popular. I think Beijing, they're popular. Beijing is the biggest airport in the world now. Is because they allow a huge volume. Their operating capacity is very high. So for us, if as our field we are to be a great airport operator, one KPI would be capacity. How much capacity can our airports handle, right? Massive capacity, little capacity. How many flights can actually, how many slots do we have available, right? How many flights can actually come in and depart? So that is why we need to understand the different ways of how our capacity can be limited, right? Because we need to take into consideration all of this when we are determining our business. Because aeronautical revenue, right, that is paid to us through airlines is a major segment, and we need to at least try and break even with that revenue, at least get close to it. So better our capacity, the larger the passenger volume we can move, the traffic we can move around, larger the sales that actually happens through the terminals, the third party rentals, all of that. If we can generate more and more and more revenue, it means it's good. So capacity is important, but there are so many ways and so many reasons why capacity can be limited. So here you have a summary that the pre-scene pitches to us as far as these limitations are concerned. All right, so let's take a look. Airport and air traffic operating capacity can be constrained due to several reasons. Number of flights an airport can handle is dictated by the airport's design, mainly size and the number of runways. So the airport size and the number of runways, the number of gates, number of terminals, etc. All of that. I think Heathrow is expanding, and they want to add a new runway. But I recently, what I mentioned earlier was the government had the local, I think London city officials had rejected the proposal and said, no, you can't do this because of noise pollution. They had rejected the idea for an additional runway. So these are concerns, right? There you go. That is one constraint where I think we will come across it later here down the line, that limits an airport's capacity. One new runway means it's massive business. So many new slots, so many new airlines, so many new landings, and therefore so many new passengers. But if you can't add that, your capacity is limited. The number of landings and takeoffs that its runways and their surrounding airspace can accommodate. So number of landings and takeoffs that the runways and their airspace can accommodate. So if your airspace is sort of limited, right? There is a fundamental difference between building an airport near the coast to building an airport within the land. Because even if near the coast you can build the largest and the longest runways, the airspace is limited. So because of that, you can have certain troubles in managing capacity. So because of that, you have to consider all of these elements, the number of landings and the takeoffs that the runways and the airspace can accommodate. Then air traffic control regulations, which require a safe separation of aircraft, both vertically and laterally, which further restricts landing and takeoff capacity. So the idea of a safe separation of aircraft is that when an aircraft is landing or taking off, there should be no interference until it's completely safe in its trajectory. That is what the safe separation is. Any kind of interjection, any kind of intervention from another route, from another flight is considered extremely dangerous. Who takes care of this? Air traffic control. So they have severe regulations. So no matter you feel like, you have a lot of slots, you have the biggest terminal, you have a lot of runways. If this is a problem, if they cannot assure safe separations of aircrafts when they are taking off, both vertically and laterally, in the lateral movement and the vertical movement, you are going to be limited because they have the final say as far as takeoffs and landings are concerned. Another limitation is aircraft movement schedules must also be restricted to allow for contingencies like adverse weather, delayed aircrafts, runway closures, etc. So they have to have some breathing room because you never know what can go wrong. One particular airlines, one particular aircraft can get delayed, and maybe it was in the middle of a particular taxiway, which is now blocking the entire path for other flights to get into the runway. Now that particular flight cannot move. Now, have you seen sometimes, maybe at least I haven't really seen it personally myself, but I've seen in movies, I've seen where the hero or the actor or whoever is waiting in the airport, and the airport has that massive, the timetable slot, and suddenly one flight says delayed, and all the other flights in sequence are all like a set of dominoes, says delayed, 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 delayed. So that happens because of this, because there can be certain unexpected reasons as to why the entire schedules can kind of get bombarded. Because of that, anyway, by default, airports and air traffic control must allow for contingencies. Weather is a major factor. It's a massive element. No matter the passenger, the crew, everybody is in top condition. But if the weather doesn't permit, right? Now for me, it's that's the funny thing about life. No matter how much control you think you have, something as simple as weather, you think it's simple, but something as simple as weather can just completely obliterate your expectations. That's very humbling, isn't it? Noise pollution for residents who live under the flight path. So this is a major factor Aircrafts landing and taking off are very noisy business. There's a lot of, like, when you're in the terminal, you don't feel it and you don't hear it. Still, you hear it, but especially if you're out, if you can see a runway, if you're living by a runway, this is very major issue, noise pollution. That is where even that example I said, where London city officials had refused for Heathrow to add a new runway because of noise pollution. So regulators might limit permission to take off and land aircrafts. We also have a handicap like that. Our field has a handicap like that. If you have read the entire briefing, you will notice. We'll come to that. Airlines might have to collaborate over scheduled arrival and departure times to avoid congestion at busy times of day. So basically just collaborate, right, with other airlines, with the airport, to maybe facilitate, maybe there's another delay, and just this working together sometimes can limit your capacity. You're basically trying to compromise here. Safety regulations could restrict the number of aircrafts that can be in the same block of airspace at any one time. So something very close to this aircraft air traffic control regulations. There could be multiple reasons, among which a key reason could be safety regulations, right? There could be defense concerns. There could be terrorism fears, right? There could be national defense fears or defense concerns, where suddenly your military saying this airspace is now no more. Recently, there was a ban, I think, for Qatar Airways to travel in other Middle Eastern airspaces, right? Suddenly, out of nowhere. And then what do you do? I remember reading some articles where some of their flights had to take, it's the air, like it's nothing, but it belongs to the countries, and therefore, they had to take very longer routes, and the PNL got hit because of the fuel usage, etc., etc. There were some concerns. So safety regulations could restrict capacity as well. And popular airports might just have too much demand that cannot be fulfilled. That can be another concern. Let's say, for example, you've got countries with very high tourist attractions. Thailand, even some of the, like Turkey, right? So there are countries with massive tourist attractions, and therefore demand is always high, and you just don't have the capacity to cater to that. So in that case, your capacity is by default limited. So this is not an exhaustive list. It's not a complete list, but it definitely captures the essence of all the reasons of why an airport's capacity and air traffic, which links to airport capacity, can be limited. So because of this, right, airports have to manage. They have to very carefully manage, because end of the day, it's a business and you need to make money. You need to be profitable. So managing the frequencies of aircraft takeoffs and landings is done through something called slots, landing slots, but generally you can use the term slots. Maybe just read that first line. All right. So what are slots? Slots are basically the right to operate a flight from a particular airport at a particular time and on a particular day of the week. That's a slot. If you own a slot, then that slot will define this date, this time, it's yours. From this terminal, this date. That block is yours. When in use, slots are owned by the airlines. This is a very important line. So slots are issued by the airports. Rather, slots are available because of the airports. Airports make slots available. But the operation, when you own, let's say you purchase a particular slot, that particular slot, what you can do with it, the destinations, exchanging it, kind of trading it, maybe compromising and, maybe delaying your flight and getting another airline to pitch in their flight to that particular slot. All of that you can do as an airline when you have purchased and booked for that slot. So when in use, slots are owned by the airlines. Slots are used to restricting flights at busy airports. However, so I think initially the design of the slot, right? When you design the timetable, like for example, if you take a sort of set of lectures, it's like the number of sessions you have. So morning 9 to 10, 1, 10 to 11, 1. These are the different slots. These are used to restrict flights at busy airports, and slots are governed by unique detailed regulations by governments. You cannot just play around with them the way you want. There are very strict conditions and regulations to the number of slots you can issue, number of airlines you can operate, who specifically are the airlines that you can operate. On top of it, you add the defense concerns, especially after 9/11, that the attack that happened. There were significant updates to airport security globally that was done. And one of the fundamental ways they upgraded security is through managing the slots very, very carefully. Who buys the slot, who purchases, the airlines, they have to go through extremely very, very severe vetting processes. I don't know to what extent that severity is, or the severity exists now, but I don't think it's any less. That's why slots are governed by unique regulations by governments. Because, imagine hijacking an aircraft means that it's kind of top down, right? So in that case, you really need to have a control at this level. Slots are exchangeable and are traded for very high values. So airlines can exchange and can trade slots. They can sell slots. And if an airline wishes to introduce a new service, it must apply for a slot. And the airport can review and grant it accordingly. That's if you want to introduce a completely new service, then you can apply for one. And if slots are not being used, so let's say I am an airline and I own a particular slot, but the slot is not being used, I'm not using that, then the airport can withdraw the slot to reallocate. It could be sensible to sell a slot that is not being used. So rather than having an empty slot with you that you don't use, it might be better, or it might make more sense before the airport withdraws it from you because they are not using it. There are conditions attached. The airport, when you're getting into that agreement, the airport will dictate that if you don't use a slot for 2 weeks, this time period, and if no flight enters into the airport because of this during this slot, we will withdraw it. So because of these conditions, it might be more sensible to sell the slot to a different, or exchange it, or rent it out, etc. This is what a slot means, and slots are basically the schedules. These are the it dictates the timetable. Slots dictate the timetable, and you just have a block of slots. You operate through them. You want more, you apply. You have additional, you sell them as an airline. All right. So this is how operational capacity, especially in terms of flight travel, is managed. There are limitations to capacity, and on top of it, we need to be vigilant about managing the capacity, and that is done by slots that are, when in use, owned by the airports. So I hope that you have a good understanding of that aspect as well. That brings me to the passenger facilities section. So yeah, so here, let me bring in something else. If you open your research folder, there are 6 documents so far, 6 files that I've added so far. The 6th one, passenger and baggage journey. So this image is a decent summary. It's a good summary of a passenger and passenger's baggage moving through the airport. So you get a good understanding. So here, let's take a look at passenger. What does a passenger do? So Mark is at the departure gate. So Mark is our passenger. And then Mark goes from the departure gate, enters the airport, and goes to the airline ticket counter. Maybe gets the ticket there, and then passes the security or goes through airport security. Need to the airport security gate is there, and all that, checking in the bag and everything happens, and that is accepted. And then you move to the food court. So you are now basically in the space called airside in the launch, in the terminal. So you're in the terminal, you're hungry, you have food, you want to kind of wait and relax. When you wait, there are different lounges, and other kind of spaces depending on the airport, depending on the culture of that country. There are so many facilities they enable. Then maybe time for your flight is finally there, and then you board the flight, and now you're inside the flight. Then the flight takes off, and then it lands. Then from aero bridge to baggage claim. From the bridge, there could be that mobile staircase approach, or directly to a terminal. From there, you go to your baggage claim. You wait there, and you wait for your baggage, through the belt, for you to arrive, and then you identify it. You get your baggage. Uh, Baggage is loaded into a trolley and brought towards the baggage breakup area, and then you exit through the gate. So this is the passenger journey. Now you can go through the image where the baggage journey is also clearly explained here. So Mark's trolley bag, what happens is, when Mark checks in, buys the ticket and checks in, the luggage is tagged. You tag it with a barcode tag. Baggage tracking information is not exposed to passengers who want to track their baggage status, which is a limitation there is. But a barcode is put on the baggage that includes all the information, right? So it goes through the belt, it gets tagged, and it goes to the flight. And through this, you would have seen these kind of. Um, I'm not very sure exactly what the technical term is for these kind of vehicles, but let's call them trolleys. So through the trolleys, the baggage enters the flight, and from the flight, it is unloaded, and again it comes from there to the belt, and there the passenger identifies the baggage and gets it back. So let's try to read the process fully now that we've gone through the image. So what happens here is, Mark reaches the departure gate, gives his ticket and ID for verification. Then Mark goes to the airline counter and collects the boarding pass. He then hands over his check-in baggage. A barcode is put on the baggage that includes all the information of the flight, terminals, transfers, and final destination. Then Mark proceeds towards the security check. While Mark enjoys a meal, the baggage is scanned by X-ray scanners that examine them to detect unusual and banned objects, and the bag might pass through multiple security screeners. If it fails the test, the passenger is called and the bag is checked in front of them. Sometimes it happens like you don't get to enjoy a meal, it happens on the spot. Then the baggage is scanned on the conveyor to determine the route of the bag by 360-degree array of scanners. The baggage is loaded into trolleys that take the luggage to the plane. Each section of the trolley carries the luggage of a particular type, for example, direct, connecting flight, etc. Then the baggage is loaded in the cargo hold of the airplane. Baggage is unloaded from the airplane after landing. Baggage is loaded into a trolley and brought towards the baggage breakup area. And the baggage enters the collection carousel. The bag is delivered to the carousel, matching his flight number at destination airport. Mark identifies the bag and collects it from the conveyor belt, books a cab, and leaves the airport. So that is a quick snapshot, a simple one, fairly accurate one as well, to a passenger's and a baggage's journey. Now, that is where we arrive at our section, passenger facilities. So as an airport operator, it is very important that we provide passenger facilities. Here, basically, there are certain terms that we need to be familiar with, and basically this process that we talked about, how is it facilitated? Firstly, landside. Landside are the areas of the terminal that are open to the public, which include check-in areas and other facilities for departing passengers. They also include spaces for those accompanying departing passengers and meeting arriving passengers. Just a second. Sorry about that. So landside. Basically, landside are areas that are open to the public, which is not only passengers, right? You would have noticed that there are spaces in certain airports when you go and your friend is leaving, but you also can go up to a certain point. So until that point is landside. They include spaces for those accompanying departing passengers and meeting arriving passengers. Airside is restricted only to passengers who have valid boarding passes. Airside. So that's the difference. So please remember, after you get your boarding pass and after you pass through airport security, you're on airside. Before that, when you're with your family and friends, before you enter through airport security, you are on the land side. Right. Now, that differentiation between landside and airside is done through the boarding pass. These are equipped with an optically scannable barcode used by departing passengers to proceed through airport security till boarding the aircraft. So they are optically scannable. They have an optically scannable barcode used by departing passengers to proceed through airport security till boarding, can often be downloaded to mobile phones or supported by airlines staff with all right. Sorry, just checking a message. Can often be downloaded to mobile phones or supported by airline staff with automated check-in facilities at arrival to the airport. So now a lot of boarding passes, you used to go and get this sort of ticket like thing, but nowadays you can just download the boarding pass to your phone and tag it to a screen, barcode reader there in the airport, and just go through to airport security. Nowadays, if you don't have baggage to check in. So it's slowly being digitized. It's actually referred to as this technology called single token movement through an airport, where you only touch base at one point, and you then have free flow throughout the entire process until you board the flight. So that is a digitalization process of airports that is being heavily pursued by so many airports in the world. And one aspect is this, where you can download the boarding pass. It acts as a verification to confirm that the passenger is on the correct flight and to create a definitive list of the passengers who are actually on the aircraft, kind of like the manifest. These are also verified at retailers' points of sale to ensure that sales tax is charged to passengers taking domestic flights and also to collect data. So basically verification, verifying which flight, which country, from where, all the necessary details for anyone who needs to know is done through the boarding pass. Very important piece of tech. Baggage. Passenger-owned suitcases or other large items of baggage must be checked in at the airport. Air tickets normally specify the weight limits of the baggage. So you would have noticed when you're traveling that there's a limit. Sometimes they discount, or sometimes they tell you, you arrive at the airport thinking you can only take 30 kilos, but then they'll say, because they have either for various reasons, either as a promotion, maybe mostly because they don't have a lot of passengers, they say, no, you can take extra 5 kilos or whatever. I've seen situations where passengers panic by hearing that, and they're sad that they didn't bring extra luggage because they're getting free, because I think to a certain extent, in certain flights, in certain routes, if you want to take extra luggage, it's very, very costly. So that is one concern. Cases are weighed on arrival at the airport and accepted into the baggage handling system. If overweight, passengers will either have to reduce the load or pay extra. Yeah, right. Next, we talk about airport security and how it facilitates lawful immigration. So this aspect is very critical, and it ensures that passengers are not harmful, they're not in danger, and do not carry any items that could endanger the safety of a flight. Adequate facilities must be available for border control checks, which include passport and immigration checks, to ensure that arriving passengers are entitled to enter the country and have any visas that are required. So that verification that people who are arriving are allowed, that they have the necessary permission, they have the visa, they have the freedom to move around and enter the country, is verified through airport security. Now, that's where I remember another, ironically, there is a, if any of you have watched any of the classic movies of Tom Hanks, if you're Tom Hanks fans, there is a very old movie called The Terminal. So he's a immigrant. He arrives at LaGuardia Airport, I think, and he's unable to, because he doesn't have valid visa. He's unable to leave the airport. He's stuck in the airside. He's stuck there for a very long time. The story is about that. So all the airport related rules and the kind of staff he meets, and he makes friends with airport staff and all that happens. So you get to learn a fair bit of how an airport operates there as well. So it's very good. I assure you, it's a very good watch for your family, even if you have time. Very old, around 1980s. The Terminal is the name of the movie. All right, so that is airport security here. Baggage is checked by customs and other government agencies to ensure that it does not contain any prohibited items and that any import taxes are paid. Airport staff and other staff working airside must wear RFID fitted identity badges issued by airport security. So while the passenger security is all verified through the air ticket and the boarding pass and the passport and the visa, on the other end, airport staff and any other kind of crew, etc., they have RFID fitted identity badges. And you would have seen even pilots, internal crew, airport staff, they always have this badge. So this tag allows users to scan themselves when moving through doors in the airport. The door locks are programmed to restrict access to authorized badge holders only. And so this is the RFID tags, the RFID technology, radio frequency identification devices, is a very commonly used technology to identify movement, even in this case, airport staff. And these are the different methods that are available, that are used in an airport to ensure airport security. Then passengers have access to retail and catering spaces in the terminals, especially in airside. Most airports provide retail and catering facilities both to occupy passengers and to generate revenue. These spaces are rented out to third parties. In many countries, tax laws permit retail sales to passengers who are traveling to foreign destinations to be duty-free, which means the sales tax is not attached to it. So the sellers pass this benefit to customers. That's why generally the duty-free points of sales, the same goods are quite cheap than purchasing it in the normal retail market. For transit passengers, hub airports, because hub airports are those major airports that offer a lot of connections. For them, hub airports offer elaborate retail and catering facilities due to long waiting times. Some airports provide lounges and other leisure facilities for these passengers to relax. So that is how a passenger's needs are kind of taken care of. Passenger facilities are provided. I hope even you have had a positive experience with as a passenger, and any kind of, sometimes, I mean, Shah Rukh Khan made a movie, right, about called My Name Is Khan, where he was frisked in the airport at the airport security, especially after the 9/11 incident. So I'm sure, like, you might have had positive, mostly positive, at least I hope, as a passenger. But as RFuel, our company, we must ensure that we do everything, one, to verify that passengers are lawful, and on the other end, that all passengers are well taken care of. So for that, there are so many things we need to do well. Finally, we have, in terms of content, we have transport and logistics infrastructure to discuss. But I was wondering if we could take a break of about 10 to 15 minutes roughly. Shall we? And then we'll come back and we'll finish up this discussion. I hope all of you are with me, and that so far you've got a good understanding of airport operations. Let's take a break then, ladies and gentlemen. I will see you in about around, now it's 6:44 here. I will see you sharp at 6:54. No, maybe 7, right? In about 15 minutes. Thank you. All right. So I hope everyone's back and you took a small break. Shall we get started then? And we'll check out the rest of the content with respect to airport operations. So here we have transport and logistics infrastructure. Actually, in the pre-scene, they pitch this in 2 different sections. But what I've done is I've basically gone through all of that and put it all into one. Relatively, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, I think it's a little more organized, and more centric to the way I pitch the story. So perhaps it will work for our analysis. Let's try and understand how important transport and logistics are for an airport. Internal transport is critical due to the large volume of staff, passengers, baggage, and other goods that move across the airport. We know this very well. Let's talk about goods. So, in terms of transporting goods, significant road links are required to carry goods such as fuel, other consumables to replenish aircraft and cargo that is carried as air freight, inventory for duty free shops, and materials required for airport operations, etc. So, you need good road linkage. These road links usually have designated access points based on the type of delivery. So basically, networks that connect to the main roadways, right, that bring goods to the airport. Airports must be equipped to refuel and resupply aircraft with fuel, lubricants, other consumables, stocks of food and beverages for passengers and crew before they take off, obviously. Now, some large hub airports have underground pipes that carry fuel to aircraft stands, thereby avoiding the need for fuel to be carried from storage tanks by tanker. So, some airports have underground pipes that facilitate fuel circulation very easily. If not, it can be a costly matter. Hub airports have industrial kitchens that can mass produce hot meals according to the airline's menu for in-flight services which are leased to specialist third-party catering companies. And these meals must meet strict hygienic requirements and will also remain appetizing. Will also have to remain appetizing after being stored for several hours in the aircraft galley. So even these, in terms of transporting the meals to the, this is basically an alternate to stocks of food and beverages for passengers and crew. Sometimes some airports have kitchens. These kitchens prepare the meals, and those meals also have to be transported to the aircrafts. Let's talk about passenger access. For passenger access, airports normally have good road access and large car parks. So passengers who are entering the airport, so they have to have good road accessibility. It must be easy to get to the airport, and large car parks that also earn significant revenue. There are other forms of ground transport like taxi ranks, bus stations, and railway stations. Now, some airports, bus and rail stations that enable long distance journeys on national public transport. And here, some airports have bus and rail stations that enable long distance journeys. That's a small typo. Sorry about that. On national public transport and provide access to nearest towns and cities. So, most of the major airports have this facility. So basically, what we are trying to understand is that taxis, bus, rail are all very important in terms of access to an airport. There are all kinds of people traveling into an airport from all these different means of transport, which means that airports have to facilitate that accessibility. Passengers driving to the airport can pay to park in an adjacent car park for the duration of their trips. Charges are higher to park closer to the terminal and lesser to park in distant locations. So rent and paying for parking seems to be a significant revenue generator for airports on the other side. But passenger access is a key element. Baggage movement. This is critical because each bag must be loaded onto the correct aircraft for collection by its owner upon arrival at the final destination. Baggage must be moved effectively to minimize congestion. Transit passenger baggage must be identified and transferred correctly to the connecting flights. So there's a lot of important matters. I mean, imagine how frustrated you get if you like get the news and if you are waiting at the conveyor belt and all the passengers seem to be getting, like who flew with you in your flight seem to be getting their baggage, but yours is missing. Imagine how frustrated you would feel. So that is definitely not something that airports want to. And I've heard plenty of stories of how annoyed passengers are, and they blame the airport, they blame the airline, they blame everyone they can, because sometimes your baggage is in an airport that it takes at least several weeks sometimes for it to return to you. So that kind of experience can be very, very negative. So this part is important. This aspect is very, very important. Baggages are tracked using standardized labels with barcodes, which I showed you in that image earlier, that are attached during the check-in. These barcodes conform to international standards, which means that they can be scanned optically by the equipment used at any airport. Scanners help baggage handlers to sort items of baggage to ensure that it is directed correctly, either to the arrivals hall or the next flight. Right? So that process needs to be precisely done, accurately done. To do this, the barcodes, the scannable barcodes, and on the other end, the scanners themselves. On top of it, there are baggage handlers. All of these individuals and all of this technology helps. Then we talk about air freight. Air freight is often used to transport high value items because of enhanced security and to avoid tying cash up in expensive inventory while it is transported by land or sea. Large airports often have warehouses to expedite shipments. Especially these warehouses can directly be connected to terminals, not passenger terminals, but freight terminals. Air freight also can be used to transport perishable goods fast. Specialist shippers also exist who use air freight to transport special cargo. So if you have food items or perishable goods that will perish in 3 days or 4 days, you need fast transport, you can use air freight.
There are also specialist shippers who specialize in certain types of aircraft, oil, air freight. Right? It could be oil, it could be a certain other commodity, it could be other type of goods. Courier services have dedicated. You would have seen these DHL flights, fully branded as DHL. So certain private companies have their own flights. On top of it, there is a completely different aspect to passenger, private air jets, etc., that we haven't touched on. That is also that those are all those additional services that airports provide. Air freight moves either by specialist cargo, only flights, or sometimes baggage holds of airliners. So these are the two options. You can have either cargo only flights. You would have seen like military flights. You would have seen where just on the side you can basically you have space to sit, but in the middle there's just cargo. Only cargo is there. The cargo hold is what makes up the entire flight. At least entire fuselage is made up of the cargo hold. But sometimes freight is also moved in the baggage holds, or parts of baggage holds are used to move air freight alongside passenger baggage. So that's a compact but complete view on how important transport and logistics infrastructure is. Now, to facilitate this is our job. As our field, we have to ensure that this aspect is well taken care of. So goods move, passengers move, baggages move, and freight moves. Finally, in understanding the business, we have to try and understand revenue. How are we going to make money? So earlier I showed to you in the pre-scene, we have three types of revenue discussed: aeronautical, non-aeronautical, and non-operating. Let's try and figure these out. So aeronautical fees mostly are basically transactions that happen between the airport and the airline. There are three types. Landing fees. Airlines must pay every time an aircraft lands or takes off at the airport. The rates depend on the size of the flight, timing, and the facilities used. That's landing fees. Then you have passenger fees, a payment by airlines for every passenger who arrives or departs on one of their aircrafts. Passenger fees, so per passenger. Then you have terminal fees. These are fees that must be paid for the use of the terminal facilities to board and disembark passengers. Rates depend on relationship and airport presence, right? They are basically, at check-in, sometimes you won't see, it's not the officers at the check-in are not airport crew. They are airlines crew. Those are like, especially if you're flying, let's say if you're flying Qatar Airways, and if you go to check in your baggage, the employees who are working with you, who are supporting you and who are helping you check in, are not airport crew. Whatever airport, wherever in the world you are, it is the airlines crew. So that is where that is one service. The airport allows the airline to bring in their people and facilitate this. So that and additional other services that the terminal provides to the airline must be reciprocated by terminal fees. So remember, aeronautical fees, you have landing fees, passenger fees, and terminal fees. Landing for landing and takeoff, passenger for per passenger, terminal for use of the terminal. Then you have non-aeronautical revenue, like car parking, retail and dining, so car rental, fuel sales, etc. So you would have noticed commission based. The pre-scene mentions commission based. The idea is that you don't do these yourself. Even car parking, the management, you outsource it. You call tenders maybe, and you get a third party to provide that service, and the third party pays you, gives you part of their revenue. So that arrangement is what you refer to as commission based here: car parking, retail and dining, rental, and fuel. Then you have direct methods of earning non-aeronautical revenue, like advertising, recharging utilities in terms of power, energy, large scale, small scale, etc. Then property and real estate. There are so many airport companies, airport operators. In fact, what happened is the pre-scene touches a little, gives you an image of how airports became privatized during the time period of 1970s, 80s. But when you really, kind of read up about it, you realize, all right, this actually happened. And now you see a trend over the past couple of decades. Major players have already ventured into it. A lot of airport operators are now also property owners and real estate owners, and they deal in real estate. So there is one famous company that we will use in our research to understand how one of their expansion routes has been moving into property and real estate. So that is non-aeronautical revenue. So the pre-scene actually mentions that this is not enough to make a profit, and this comes in, and this is where actually you generate a top of the margin profit. Then you have non-operating revenues like your interest on bank deposits, if you have major deposits, and other kind of anything that doesn't belong to aeronautical or non-aeronautical, you can plug it into non-operating, like government grants, subsidies, etc. So this is basically a revenue classification that is an alternate. Thank you. That is an alternate view. What I've basically done is here you notice revenues, and they basically explain the whole thing here. What I've done is I've taken it all and prepared this table for you. So in one snapshot, you have a full view of how an airport earns money. That is the ending, that marks the ending of our discussion dedicated to understanding the industry, understanding the business model. Very interesting thing this time with the pre-scene is they're an international player. They deal in multiple currencies because they deal in multiple cross-border transactions. They have to bring their money back to base, which means that there's a little exposure to currency risk, translation risk, transaction risk. So on that side, we might need to hedge. We might need to have a proper treasury function, some way to mitigate currency risk, which means we know that aspect can be or could be tested. Definitely, I'm sure at least a couple of the variants are going to test. So if you think you're weak in that area, pick those videos, watch them, familiarize yourself with them, note down any queries, bring them up to the sessions, etc. So we prepare ourselves strategically. We are a business that is international. Unlike now, last time it wasn't the case. Last time we had a pretty straightforward business located within one country, one border. This time that's not the case. On top of it, we are dealing with so many suppliers. This operation is massive. We have multiple suppliers. The supply chain is extensive, which can bring so many complications, right? This is not a simple business, not a straightforward business. Because of that, we have to have a very open mind. So that is an interesting idea, which is why you can pick areas that you think you're weak at and apply and just decide, all right, this is how I'm going to revise. These are the areas I need to revise. These are what I'm weak at. So let me revise this. So plan it out based on your familiarity with the content.